The lobby of the bank was bustling with customers that bright morning, sunlight pouring through the wide glass windows, casting streaks of gold across the polished marble floors. Men and women in business attire tapped impatiently on their phones, shuffling papers, and glancing at the wall clock as they waited for their turn. In the midst of this polished environment, a man who looked completely out of place stepped inside. His name was Mr. Harlan, a tall, elderly figure with a weathered face, gray beard, and clothes that looked as though they had seen decades of hard work. His checkered shirt was faded, his jeans torn in places, and a straw hat shielded him from the blazing sun outside. He moved slowly, clutching an old leather wallet in his calloused hands, his presence drawing curious stares from those around him. This wasn't the first time Mr. Harlan had entered a bank, but the weight of the looks he received always made him want to shrink into the ground. The wealthy clients in their crisp suits glanced at him with a mixture of pity and judgment. Even the staff seemed reluctant to meet his eyes. But today, he had come for something simple. He wanted to check his account balance, just to make sure everything was as it should be. He had worked his whole life in silence, never flashing his wealth or boasting about his success, and that decision often left him underestimated. As he stood in line, the bank's branch manager, Victor Moreau, walked out from his glass office. Victor was everything Mr. Harlan wasn't: young, handsome, and immaculately dressed in a dark blue suit with a red tie. He thrived on appearances and power, often speaking down to those he believed had no value. His laughter carried across the hall when he spotted Mr. Harlan waiting with his wallet. Victor nudged his colleague at the counter and whispered something that made the clerks chuckle. Then, loud enough for customers to hear, he sneered, "If you even have a balance, old man, I'll pay you double." The words sliced through the room like a blade. Conversations halted, heads turned, and eyes settled on the frail figure in the straw hat. Mr. Harlan lowered his gaze, his shoulders heavy with quiet dignity. He didn't respond, didn't argue. For years, he had endured mockery from those who judged by appearances. The pain of being seen as worthless was familiar, but that didn't make it easier. What Victor didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man standing before them wasn't just another poor soul. He was the owner of the very bank they worked in, the silent CEO who had built his empire brick by brick but never flaunted it. The clerk finally called Mr. Harlan forward, his voice tinged with amusement after Victor's comment. The elderly man stepped to the counter, handed over his ID, and waited patiently. The clerk typed into the computer, his smirk faltering as the screen displayed numbers he had never seen before in a personal account. His eyes widened, his jaw stiffened, and he leaned closer to confirm. Zeros filled the screen, a fortune that could purchase the entire building many times over. His hands trembled slightly as he whispered, "Sir, your account," before stopping himself, realizing Victor was watching. Victor, sensing something was off, strutted forward with a laugh. "Come now, don't tell me he actually has something in there." But when the clerk hesitated, Victor snatched the paper being printed and froze mid-laugh. His face paled as he read the balance, his arrogance evaporating like mist under the sun. His hands shook as he realized that this man he mocked was not only wealthy but the very person whose approval determined his career. The bank fell silent. Customers leaned forward, whispering to one another, while staff exchanged nervous glances. Mr. Harlan, still calm and quiet, retrieved the paper slip, folded it, and slid it into his wallet. His voice was steady, carrying a power that came not from loudness but from truth. He looked at Victor and said, "The real balance we carry isn't in a bank account, but in how we treat others." With that, he turned to leave, his slow steps echoing like thunder in the hush of the room. Victor's chest tightened. His face burned with shame, and suddenly every polished surface around him felt like a mirror reflecting his cruelty. The laughter he had once cherished as power now rang in his ears as disgrace. Customers who once admired his confidence now eyed him with contempt. Staff who followed his orders now saw him for what he truly was, a man who mocked the humble and bowed only to wealth. But Mr. Harlan wasn't finished. Before he reached the door, he paused, turned slightly, and addressed the entire lobby. His voice carried warmth now, an echo of kindness that filled every corner. "I grew up with nothing. Every dollar I earned came from sweat, sacrifice, and patience. I built this bank not to make men arrogant, but to give families hope, to help workers achieve their dreams, to remind people that respect must always come before wealth. If you see someone who looks worn or tired, remember, you know nothing of the storms they've survived. Treat them with the dignity you'd want for yourself." The room was still. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed to pause, as though the universe was listening. Tears glistened in the eyes of a young mother in line. An older man in the corner nodded slowly, pressing his hand to his chest. For a moment, it felt as though the world had shifted, as if every person in that bank had been forced to look inward. Victor, however, stood frozen, humiliated before his staff and customers. Pride wrestled with shame inside him, and for the first time in years, he felt small. But more than that, he felt broken, realizing he had built his career on arrogance instead of service. Mr. Harlan left the building without another word, his quiet figure stepping into the sunlight, leaving a silence behind him that felt heavier than any reprimand. That afternoon, whispers spread like wildfire. By the evening, news of the event had reached the top of the corporate tower, and within days, Victor was called into a meeting with the board. Sitting at the head of the table was Mr. Harlan, no longer in his straw hat, but in a simple suit that still carried his humility. He looked at Victor, not with anger, but with disappointment, and said, "Leadership isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but by how kindly you treat the smallest voice in the room." Victor resigned soon after, unable to bear the weight of his shame, while the staff began to see their work differently. Customers walked into the bank with a newfound sense of respect, remembering the story of the man in the straw hat. And Mr. Harlan continued to live as he always had, simply, quietly, choosing humility over grandeur. To him, wealth was never the goal, dignity was. In the years that followed, the story of that day was told and retold like a legend, not just about a CEO in disguise, but about a truth we so often forget, that appearances deceive, but character never does. And somewhere, in a sunlit lobby filled with strangers, an old man had reminded the world what true wealth really means.